Hi, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Youth Knowledge Break series of the EU Council of Europe Youth Partnership. My name is Lana Pasic. I'm a Youth Research and Policy Manager at the Youth Partnership. And Youth Partnership, for those of you who don't know, is a joint cooperation program between the Council of Europe and the European Commission in the field of youth. It has been active since 1998. And one of our functions is gathering knowledge, data, conducting research and evidence for the use of youth policymakers, youth workers, young people, and the youth sector at large. One of our projects that we started this year is the Youth Knowledge Briefs and Youth Knowledge Break series. And the goal of these gatherings is to share knowledge, to foster discussions, and also to facilitate dialogue between different stakeholders in the youth sector. We started in May with the topic of young people in rural areas and their right to stay. And we are continuing this series now with the focus on climate justice. And today we have with us Filipe Alves, who will be speaking about the climate justice in the youth field. Maybe before giving the floor to Filipe, just to briefly mention how the Youth Partnership is working on this topic. So we started already in 2020 when the Advisory Council on Youth brought this to the attention with the research and publication of the sustainability checklist. And since then, we have also worked on some publications on young people and climate litigations and climate emotions, as well as the youth knowledge book on young people and democracy in the climate crisis. And we have also published a compendium on youth climate activism. And we have also been involved with the Climate Justice Think Tank, which was started 2 years ago. And I know that Filipe will be speaking about this and other processes in the European youth field. Maybe just a bit of guidelines regarding the process. We will have a presentation. If you have questions in the meantime, feel free to use the chat function of the Zoom. And at the end of the presentation, you'll also be able to raise your hand and ask questions and unmute yourself, so we can also have a bit of a discussion on this topic. So thank you everybody again for joining, and Filipe, I pass the mic to you.
Got it. Thank you. Thank you, Lana. Good morning, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for being here on this very timely and important and, well, pressing topic nowadays more than ever. And yeah, so today here on this knowledge break, the topic is climate justice. Of course, we're going to be seeing it from the lenses of the youth sector, the youth field, and mostly from an European perspective. Yeah, so I'm not sure how many of you had actually the chance to go through the brief, and I hope if you've gone through it, perhaps you've been wanting to know more about it. And it's actually brief is the right word. The first manuscript I sent to Lana was 4 times bigger, so there was a lot of pruning in this brief, so that it is at the moment, but it's really just a short introduction of not only what climate justice means and is nowadays from a youth perspective. This is mostly the angle that we went on this knowledge brief, but also what is the landscape nowadays. So basically from a policy, scientific and societal perspective, what's happening, what's moving, what are the dynamics. And this is a very alive and dynamic field at the present moment, as I'm going to show you in a short moment. And also, of course, the question was, what are young people doing about it? Young people, youth organizations, the youth sector, what's happening in the youth sector about it? And of course, in the brief, we also look again, of course, into some future thinking and policy recommendations. So The brief, if you haven't had a chance, basically just goes through these four key topics. Of course, Lana will share the link so you can download it. Yeah, and basically I'm just gonna go through some of the core contents, but of course giving you a little bit more framing so that when you read it, then you have hints and clues to go a bit further. So climate justice, this is the topic. Of course, this is not a new concept. I guess most of you have heard it, have worked with it. Ever since the first climate justice conference in The Hague in 2000 actually, which was parallel to COP6. Then later on, it was a concept that was finally integrated in the United Nations in 2002, and then at COP13 in Bali, firstly recognized. But climate justice in the beginning was mostly about compensation mechanisms and also allowing the rights for the global south to develop. And later on, and particularly coming a lot of people from the human justice and environmental justice movement. And for me personally, I met Mary Robinson back in the day, and she brought a lot of this idea of climate justice as a human-centered approach, which highlights kind of this moral paradox that, of course, the world's most vulnerable populations, young people, indigenous communities, etc., are going to be the ones already suffering and going to suffer the gravest consequence of climate change, while of course being the least responsible for those emissions on the first place. So this really became not only an intergenerational injustice issue, but also from a geographical perspective, from a socioeconomic perspective. There's a lot of injustices in here, and of course Mary has been doing a lot of work on this topic. However, the concept of climate justice has been evolving quite a lot, and there's no single kind of right definition. And if you want, then I'm going to share a recent article on the Journal of Climate Policy that just showed how often and in how many varied definitions there are. So in the brief, what we did was we took somehow a kind of a definition that we felt comfortable with, but somehow that anchored some of the key ideas that perhaps are prevalent in the youth-led movement and youth-led organizations when they work with climate justice. And one of them is this idea of climate justice being a transformative approach. So it was very classic on the idea of systems change, not climate change, and the idea that it's not about emissions. It's about power relations. It's about participation. It's about governance. So it needs a more transformative, radical approach. And we see it a lot in the youth field. So one of the things that I'm going to share with you a bit later is that when the youth sector and the youth field and youth organizations take on the climate justice, they take it not with the idea of this is about emissions, but this is about changing the whole system, the economic system, the political system, and so on. So that's why I believe that the word transformative here is very intentional. On the other hand, we also have climate justice not only as a transformative approach, but also as intersectional approach to climate action. And this is, of course, intersectionality is something that the youth sector has been working a lot with, that you are very comfortable with, I guess. There's actually a great toolkit, which I'm also going to share with you on climate justice and needs an intersectional approach here from the Youth and Environmental Europe organization. So this is kind of two important dimensions that we wanted to highlight. And moreover, here the idea that climate justice is really about human rights as well. So that's why we also put here the idea of rights. And as you're going to see later on, the idea of youth not as stakeholders, but as rights holders for the future. So one of the things that we brought with this definition that we presented in the brief is not only this transformative, but intersectional, but also the idea that it's a key governance issue, that there's a key democratic challenge within the climate justice movement that needs meaningful participation in climate decision making, because there is structural inequalities, because there are historical legacies, and because we need new kinds of relationships between people, communities, and the natural world. So this is somehow the definition that we come forth in this knowledge brief. Of course, it's only one, and for example, we are going to mention also the position paper from the think tank that Lana just mentioned, and there you can also see. Climate justice being defined also from the normative lenses or from a descriptive lenses, and also with its different dimensions. So there you can also go further and just kind of unpack a little bit more this definition. For now, for the brief, we just wanted to something that transmits what I believe is an underlying feeling in young people, that is, this is a movement of transformation, of intersectional transformation, assuring the rights of future for the future generations. Now, this is also somehow a definition. This for me, it's coherent with some of the evolution of some position papers that the European Youth Forum, for example, have had. And I go back to 2015, for example, where the European Youth Forum made a vision from the youth to COP 21, which was again 2015 in Paris, where it was already very clear that climate justice from the youth field meant increased participation of young people from all backgrounds in decision-making processes, legally binding instruments that commit states to the protection of future generations, global agreements on greater intergenerational solidarity with specific funding mechanisms, and a climate justice approach that links human rights, youth rights, and development. And this is back in 2015. Of course, some of these recommendations, some of these from the European Youth Forum and from other youth organizations were not fully taken. And I believe this is what also led to a number of developments in, well, more recently, because there's definitely a shift in 2017, 18, 19, which is relevant for what's going to happen, what's happening today. And we can already see it. So, in 2015, this was kind of what the European Youth Forum was coming out. In 2025, so 10 years later, it's very interesting how things change. And now the narrative is really about, we need a new economic system. We need a radical change. We need to tax the rich, we need a new climate finance. So there's a radical shift in the narrative of coming from the youth sector, demanding much bigger transformative shifts of power and relationships. So I think that's one of the underlying things that's very much alive in the field. And there's a lot of things where you can see this. Now, I mentioned that 2017, 18, 19 is a critical moment, because there's a lot of things that happened with, I guess, a growing dissatisfaction, particularly in young people, with the inability of governments and global governance on climate change to really deliver on the promises. And basically, we see the failure of basically the COP21 in Paris and those all of agreements. And then you see in 2018, 19, basically Extinction Rebellion is created and funded. We see Fridays for the Future. In 2019, we have the global strikes, we have the school strikes, we have the September Global Week for the Future, where like the kids went on strike for a whole week. We have the beginning of a number of NGOs and organizations which are very active nowadays. So there's a big shift there in 2018-19, which somehow perhaps also influenced a little bit of the policy making in the European Green Deal, the European Climate Pact, which already embed some of the values of climate justice. And again, a little bit after, we start seeing big litigation cases also coming up. So from the 2015s to nowadays, what we see is that within the youth field, and particularly with the climate justice, we see this movement for a transformative change to the whole system. And there's a few dynamics which I think are important to highlight, and we highlighted in the brief. And one of them is that one of the instruments that the youth is actually taking more and more on board is litigation. And this has been raising quite dramatically ever since 2000. It's a recent thing, so it's like somewhere from the 2000s, 2021 to 2022, 23, 24, 25. We see a sharp increase at the global level, but also at the national and at the local level. We see a very big increase in litigation, climate related or environmental, ecological litigation cases, and it's being more and more used. And there's a bunch of reports. Of course, also the Youth Partnership has a report specifically on this matter. UNEP also publishes every year this report on climate change in the courtroom. And again, we have to highlight that this is becoming an instrument of youth-led organizations, youth, to really either stop or block certain development projects, to litigate against corporate liability and corporate specific companies, or just to demand from states bigger action. And what is also happening, this is again very recently, this is why I was saying that the field is very dynamic at the moment, is that there is more and more supportive legal binding documents, either from the International Court of Justice or from the United Nations General Assembly or from even the Council of Europe. There's more and more documents that are somehow supporting this more meaningful participation. They're protecting the right to protest. They're protecting the right for young people to mobilize, to assemble, and to demand different types of rights connected with the clean air and clean water and clean place to live and affordable living and so on and so forth. So it's again, it's not about cutting emissions, and it's not about just incremental changes and planting more trees. Now it really has become about a fight for human rights, and we see a lot of young people behind this. So, for example, these United Nations that recognize and the advisory opinion on the International Court of Justice, it actually initially started with a group of young people from the Pacific Islands that actually started to demand this kind of thing. So it was actually a youth-led movement that ultimately led for the International Court of Justice to make their advisory opinion, which was later recognized by the United Nations, which now recognize that the states have the duty to actually uphold a number of international conventions and so on and so forth, and they are legally obliged to do it. And again, I think these documents just show that I believe that litigation and these kind of court cases are continue to grow, and I think youth will continue to use it. And a big part of that is again this big discontentment with the global governance on climate change, and basically the failure of some of these like the COPs, IPCCs, and so on and so forth, the failure to really deliver transformative change. And we saw that now at COP30. There was a lot of big expectations about big changes in terms of the finance, etc. Again, there was a very weak overall outcome. There was a lot of youth organizations there, which were like very active, very strong advocacy. They were very discontent. They were, well, discontent, angry. They were really, in a way, not happy at all on how things were going. And again, because in a way, although there is increased youth participation, we can still say that a little bit, there's still a little bit of youth washing, let's say like this, in these matters. So there's like, the youth is there for the picture, let's say like this, but it has not really a critical voice in decision-making processes. This can be seen. So one of the things that is happening, and we see it more and more and more, and I just bring here three examples, is that a lot of youth-led organizations are taking matters into their own hands. So besides doing more advocacy and besides going to the courts, we see actually much more direct action. And for example, the project funding Fair Futures that brings together Generation Climate Europe, EcoLease, a number of CAN Europe, and a number of other organizations, is a great example on how youth is basically not waiting for big decisions to be made, but it's basically just taking the lead, finding ways to finance the projects, and basically doing direct action. So I guess this is one of the things that we wanted to pass in the brief, and I just give I know quite well the example in Portugal and Spain and France, a little bit in Germany, is that youth-led movements and youth climate activism has changed quite a bit in the past 10 years. It has changed from, awareness raising and planting trees and, small movements to full-on protests, blockades, climate litigation, and the narrative is a completely different narrative. So, for example, I'll give you here this example of Climaximo, which is, again, 2019 was created with a very strong direct action perspective, and it's mobilizing the youth with the idea of climate justice. At the same time, for example, for the first time, we now have an NGO which is solely focused on using courts and climate litigation and defending, of course, climate activists. And this, again, this is a very recent organization. There's now also in Spain and France and some other countries. So you can see how the youth is also using other instruments to become an activist. So becoming an activist nowadays, it does not mean planting trees now or just planting trees. Now it means that maybe you are a lawyer and you are defending your fellow climate activists which are on the streets. It means that you're blocking an airport. It means that you go and block a mine. It can mean a number of different issues. And I think this is interesting just to understand this is what's happening. And again, just another example now with the heat waves in Europe, it was very interesting just for me as also to see how youth-led organizations mobilized, at the European level quite fast with the hashtag cities not saunas. But then again, it was not only about raising awareness about heat waves and so on and so forth. When you actually go and you see the narrative is we need to radically redesign our cities. They are not livable. We need green spaces. We need to change mobility. We need to change infrastructure. We need to change so on and so forth. So again, the narrative that the youth-led movements are having in this climate justice movement are becoming not only more systemic and intersectional, but also more transformative. So this is something that we wanted really to highlight in the climate brief. A good example of this change from awareness raising to protests and advocacy and direct action is, for example, Youth and Environment to Europe, an organization, back from the 80s, and mostly then conservation and, small actions. And nowadays it works on advocacy, it works on capacity building, it works on litigation, of course, very much on climate justice. So you can see this shift on how youth-led organizations are actually making from this dimension to a more direct process, democracy, and so on. Of course, this is just part of the reality. It's important to know, for example, there was a recent also document from Claudia issued from, again, part of this beginning of the think tank of Salto, which also showed that within the youth sector, climate justice has still has still a lot to go, particularly when it comes to inclusion. And we see that it's really still fails to include voices from young people with fewer opportunities. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done in including these people with fewer, young people with fewer opportunities within the climate justice movement. So there's a lot of these perspectives which are still not embedded or integrated. It also, again, it's recognized that youth leadership is central, but there's a lot of youth washing. There's still not really let's say, a true commitment, particularly at the more national or European level when it comes to climate decision making. Of course, in terms of the financing of these initiatives, actions, so on and so forth, there's still quite a few gaps. So, of course, there is this side in the youth sector of youth mobilizing for transformative action, and there's a lot of also youth organizations and youth led organizations which are still a bit, let's say, lacking proper inclusion, proper funding, and there's a lot of capacity that's still needed. And this is a great document if you want to go through, because Claudia really went deep into the youth field, like interviewing organizations, seeing what they needed. So there's a great document for you to read. One of the the things that also is a kind of a dynamic within climate justice and the youth field is a growing body of literature in toolkits, documents, research being done, particularly since 2022. So everything is quite fresh. In the past 4 years, there's been quite a lot of body, and I just put here three examples from the Youth Partnership, but there's plenty more examples, and we can then share with you some links of a growing body of literature and research on this topic. So this is again everything is very fresh, but there's quite a lot of toolkits. So if you're new into it and if you want to basically get an understanding of what climate justice can mean for the youth sector, there's plenty of toolkits already there. There's plenty of documents already there. So this is something which is definitely a trend. Uh, One of the most recent ones, I guess, is fresh out of the oven, I would say, because it was just published, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago, is the position paper from the climate justice think tank called Advancing Climate Justice in the European Youth Field. And again, if you go into the document, you will see there's plenty of good contents. There's like a lot of recommendations. And this is directly, for example, speaking into, for example, national agencies, how to embed more climate justice within their work, within their recommendations, so on. For example, also for youth-led organizations, how can they work in this field? How can they empower youth or youth-led organizations to be more active, to have more direct impact? And of course, there's this undeniable conclusion that it is critical at the moment that the youth sector takes a bigger role in shaping the future in Europe, and it needs to take space, it needs to take power, it needs to take voice, and of course there's a lot of ways in which how this can happen. Most of it is actually just to support what's already happening. So in a way, one of the, of course, recommendations is just to support all the movements that are already happening, support the activists, protect the youth organizations so that they don't have the fear of getting arrested, for example, or something like this. But in terms of what we summarized in the brief, was 6 key points that we believe that somehow could further reinforce and empower this climate justice movement within the youth field in Europe. And one of them of course, has to do with youth participation. And the word here is meaningful. It's really to make it meaningful. And there's a lot of consultation processes. I personally believe that consultation is not participation. So in the ladder of participation, consultation is not participation yet. So we need to move into co-decision making, and this is at all governance levels. So this is one of the ways to ensure meaningful participation. And of course, there has to be permanent youth participation mechanisms, particularly for these less represented and more diverse young people, which are often the voices that are not heard, are not embedded. So this is something that needs to happen. The European Youth Forum has also very concrete recommendations on how to make it legally binding at different levels of governance at European level. So this is definitely something that needs to happen more and more and more. On the second level, the whole idea of strengthening inclusion and intersectionality, and this can happen in many different ways, but somehow it's like the youth already got the intersectionality between all the systems. And while it seems that at the higher levels of governance, of power or economic power, it's still not there. So somehow it needs to be brought to this kind of level. The third point that we wanted to bring in the brief is all about funding. So it's all about long term, which is one key word here, long term funding for youth led initiatives. They're already happening. Again, funding for Fairer Future is a good example. Next Gen, the youth branch of Global Eco Village Network, is a great example of how to actually promote already direct action and youth-led initiatives. But there's much more need for long-term funding for this kind of initiatives in climate justice. And there's a lot of needs for to reduce administrative barriers to access climate action specific funding. So this is something that's definitely going to grow in the future. That's definitely going to happen. So the idea is just to facilitate the access for this funding for youth-led organizations. Then one of the levels that we felt that there's still a lot of room to build is capacity in youth work. And again, for example, I'm also part of different youth organizations, and I'll be going, for example, for the European Academy on Youth Work, and I see that there's a lot of work that still needs to be done in embedding ecological awareness, embedding climate justice dimensions in youth work. So there's definitely a lot of work that needs to be done there, not only to train youth workers on climate justice and meaningful participation, but also on all these tools that link climate action with a more participatory democracy and a more direct democratic action. And then the fifth part is about protecting, as I was saying, safeguarding civic spaces and youth rights, safeguarding the freedom of expression, assembly, and protect young environmental defenders. This is a key point. And again, in the Council of Europe recommendation, this is very clearly there. So we can actually take those kind of documents, like the recommendation of the Council of Europe, to safeguard the freedom of expression of youth. And finally, one of the points that we didn't touch here so much, but it's really critical, is the idea that it's really important to have reliable, accessible, youth-friendly climate information. There's a lot of disinformation and misinformation going around, and of course, we cannot make good decisions based on bad information, and there's too much climate misinformation happening. So there's a big role for media literacy, but also for young people being themselves the gatekeepers of certain types of information within the climate movement. So this is something that, for example, the Council of Europe has been working with this fighting misinformation. There's also a document from a recent seminar from last year, this was one of the topics. You can also read it, which has a lot of key insights about how can we fight misinformation at the local level, national level, and so on. Of course, this is not going to happen overall. We also kind of imagine how this roadmap could happen. Of course, what we see is that things are moving much faster nowadays than actually perhaps with AI, like this document was done, but we see that things are, and they need to move much faster. So perhaps even this small kind of roadmap is already outdated, because what we're seeing is that there is a pressing need for moving much faster in terms of climate action and in terms of climate justice. Anyhow, overall, this is the document that we have created. So this is like in 20 minutes. I hope I didn't take it too long. But in a way, the document just wants to put there what is climate justice from a kind of a youth lenses and nowadays, what makes sense, what's alive in the field from mobilization, litigation, what are the needs, and basically what can new policies bring to the sector. So this is, in a short summary, what the brief is all about. And again, the brief is just a doorway for further research and further literature on the topic. Yeah. So I guess this is, for me, I don't know, I didn't see the chat, so I hope there's going to be questions, but I'm going to stop sharing now the screen. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Filipe, for such a rich and detailed presentation. I really enjoyed it. I have shared some links in the chat related to not only the brief, but also some of the documents of the Youth Partnership, which you have mentioned. And also, maybe just to say before we dive into the questions, for me, it's really interesting how we have witnessed within the last decade, perhaps this transition from sustainability to kind of more climate activism, and now really associating climate action and climate change with the broader social justice issues. And this is something that perhaps in 2019, when we had a symposium on youth participation, when climate movement was active, we were not seeing to such an extent. And certainly not when we did our ticket on youth work and sustainability, which was 2017. So we were still talking about sustainability back then, and kind of what kind of small scale actions we can do. So it's really interesting how quickly we have moved on this topic from sustainability to climate justice. Okay, do we have any questions for Filipe or any comments from the participants in the webinar? You can raise your hand, or you can unmute yourself, or you can also write in the chat. And perhaps, okay, there is someone has switched on their camera. Laura? If you can unmute yourself.
Can you hear me?
Perfect.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Felipe, for your presentation. It's really interesting. Just to introduce myself, I'm a new colleague at the Council of Europe. I mean, I recently joined the Council of Europe about 3 months ago. I'm coming from the Italian Ministry of Environment, and where I was working on UNFCCC negotiations, specifically on carbon markets. But yeah, so I'm familiar with the idea of greenwashing. Less familiar with the youth washing that you mentioned. So since I'm now working at the Council of Europe, I'm working in the secretariat of the steering committee on the environment, and specifically now working on, I mean, one of the deliverables that the committee is supposed to produce is a study on the conditions enabling child and young environmental defenders to access information safely and freely express themselves, and access to justice. So this is everything is really, really relevant, and all the documents as you share, it's really, really relevant. So I was just wondering whether you could elaborate a bit more on youth washing, what is meant. It's about the participation, the consultation that you just mentioned, or it's more broadly? Thank
Hi,
you.
Laura. Yeah. So one of the things that I would recommend is that so there was a seminar in November, end of November of last year, that brought together Council of Europe together with Erica, and basically to talk about this topic of misinformation, disinformation, and youth washing. If you see basically the final report, I think there's a lot of good insights about this topic there, and what the Council of Europe is doing, but also what the youth information centers are trying to do in order to fight misinformation, disinformation. So I think that could be a great resource for you. It's Simon. No, okay. If you want, then you can write to me, and I'll send you directly the report. One of the topics that was brought there, but it's kind of a ongoing thing about youth washing, is this idea, and this again, that young people are sometimes brought in to the picture, or to the somehow council or something, just to meet some quota or a standard or a checklist, but they're not really meaningful participating in the decision-making process, or they're not really influencing the decision-making process, or they're not really, let's say, bringing their voice. So they're basically there for somebody to check a list, or somebody to take a picture and say, oh, look, we did with the youth. And this was something that was actually voiced from the youth participating in those forums, and saying, yeah, we were there, but this was just for the picture. Oh yes, they invited us, but they really don't pay attention to what we were saying. Or yes, they invited us, but all that we said was not integrated in the final document, you know? So youth watching is this idea of you basically you invite youth, but you're not really paying attention. You're not really embedding their voices. You're not really integrating their perspectives into the final document, into the decision-making process, and so on and so forth. And this was something that we saw again because there was a lot of youth pressure, particularly at COPs, for example. To integrate more youth voices, indigenous voices, etc. So again, there was this attempt to integrate those voices, but most of these integrations were not successful. They were really not impactful in any meaningful way. So again, this actually backlashed. People even felt more unseen and more betrayed because they said, okay, now we're really just here for the picture. This is even worse than not even inviting us. So it actually just adds more fuel to this idea that there are certain governance structures which are just not working to deliver on the type of transformative change that we need to see happen when we deal with these kind of big societal challenges. And I believe that again, the birth of Extinction Rebellion, Fridays for the Future, all these NGOs and all these youth-led movements in 2018, 1920, I think is a result of exactly that. And this is what we try to transmit. So it's an energy it's there. And somehow it should be harnessed for, again, creative, meaningful, purposeful, impactful issues. So that's, yeah. I'm not sure if I answered your question, but I think Lana already shared this report. Yeah.
Thank you, Filipe, and thank you, Laura, for the question. I added the report. It's on the Erica's page at the Council of Europe Youth Department's website. Do we have any other questions, comments? I would just like to reflect also on what Laura has mentioned on this steering committee on environment. It's also something quite recent at the Council of Europe and also the environment strategy, which also mentions the recommendation on youth and climate action. So, all right.
I think
Anybody else?
Katerina.
Yes. We don't hear you well, Katerina. Maybe the mic. It happens.
Can you hear me
it's
now?
normal.
I think
Yeah.
good. Thank you. No, oh, sorry to jump in. But I was trying to find where to raise the floor and the hand, but I couldn't do it. And I just wanted to thank Philippe for his presentation. I think it was very interesting. I'm working at the Council of Europe in the Environment Department as well. I'm a policy advisor here at the Council of Europe. And it's also good, let me say, to hear someone speaking with the Portuguese accent. And to identify as well a lot of things that I see in the Portuguese media that you mentioned, and also the youth participation that project also that you mentioned, and that have been very active, and I've been following in particular the work of Ultimo Recurso, and it's I have to say that they do an amazing work in Portugal, and also trying to be present at the global level. What I wanted to ask you, Philippe, I don't know if in all this research of this you have come to these questions, but the first one you spoke about meaningful participation, and how, and also most of the affected areas or the youth also come from the interior regions. Let's speak, for example, of Portugal, all these areas where sometimes there's also a lot of factors that are interconnected, the environmental damage, the effects of climate change, and also social cohesion. And there's all these factors that relate to one another and can exacerbate also some consequences. What is the participation? Do you see a different level of participation in these environmental governance, let's say, between the coasts and the interior and the most affected regions by climate change, and different levels of I don't know, just of social dimension? Do you see any different of participation, and how can we involve more people from more youth, from more desertification areas, for example, in the process? And the second question has to do with the emerging right, if you can call it like that, of the right to a healthy environment, the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. How do you see this as contributing to empower more youth in climate litigation? And I know that we are focusing on climate justice, but I also like to speak in a more broader way about also environmental justice, not only climate, because sometimes or at least some courts tend to do a distance between what's environment and climate. And I think it's important that when we talk about the two issues, we talk about them in a comprehensive way and not in an isolated way. But how do you think that the emerging of the right that could bring more protection, could be more important to youth participation as in context of environmental and climate litigation? Thank you.
Okay, these are hard questions from Katarina. Let me see if I can bring some insights. So one of the things that we're definitely seeing, and again, I believe that youth-led movements are very powerful in this, is the need for new governance bodies and new governance structures. And I think we're seeing them emerging either in parallel or trying to reform the existing ones at the international level, national level, and local level. So this is something that has been seen. And again, in Portugal, we see new organizations, new governance structures appearing. For example, we see municipalities taking a bit more power in terms of local initiatives and the defense of local projects and so on and so forth. But what we're seeing is actually this. We're seeing that, okay, we need new governance bodies because the existing ones are not working, or they are too conservative, or they are too blocked in or binding, or so on. So there's this emergence of new governance bodies. And again, the dynamic is, of course, at least I see it much more happening in coastal areas and more densely populated areas than actually in rural areas, of course. So in Portugal, you can see there's much more climate activism, for example, in Sudoeste Alentejano, and for example, than in the Alentejo. So definitely you see that there's a dynamic which is definitely more at the coastal or more densely popular areas. But what I think is that the meta dynamic is this idea of new governance bodies and new governance dynamics. So, for example, sociocratical decision-making processes are now coming into the forefront as a new way of making decisions, for example, at some local levels, municipal levels, inter-regional levels. And this, again, changes dynamics of power and so on and so forth. And again, a lot of it's coming from the youth-led organizations, youth sector, and so on and so forth, because they are the ones bringing these new methods of direct democracy, deep democracy, sociocracy, etc. So I guess from a more meta perspective, I believe these two dynamics are definitely happening. New governance bodies and structures, and at the same time, new decision-making tools and processes, which are being brought to the forefront to ensure more meaningful participation. So I guess these two are happening, and particularly at more densely populated areas, that's for sure. So I think I see these movements happening. I am part of different networks at different levels, all the way from ECOLIS, which is a European level, to national networks and so on. And I see this wanting for new new democracy methods itself. Now, for the second part of your question, that I'm not entirely sure. So what I believe, I'm an economist, by the way. I'm not a law or lawyer or anything like this. But what I see is that, at least from the people I know at Ultimo Recurso and so on and so forth, the recent, let's say, these documents, the Council of Europe recommendation, the International Court of Justice, the court cases that got a lot of media attention, for example, I know quite well two of the Portuguese young kids that submitted the court. They got a lot of media attention, and all of that actually, I believe, is helping together with this idea that climate justice is a human right. And part of the human rights is clean air, clean food, is affordable living, so on and so forth. Part of that is fueling and promoting this kind of a narrative, which is one of the mechanisms that we have to change the system is by using existing legal and legal structures and legal cases. So I do see that this is what I was saying in the beginning, that it's going to increase and it's going to continue to increase, particularly, I would say, at the local level. So we are already seeing, in Portugal, for example, now it's becoming almost like okay to people do a providência cautelar, which I don't know what's the English. Katarina, maybe you can help me. What's a providência cautelar in English?
Injunction.
Okay, injunction, because people say, oh, this company wants to do here a mine, boomba, they put immediately an injunction, and of course, 10 years ago, this was not the case. People like the environmental 20 years ago, it was not the case. Nowadays, it's like no, we're gonna start with that, and then we're gonna go there, and so on and so forth. So it's definitely becoming the norm to start using these legal ways, again, parallel and complementary to everything else. So you can see it, for example, in Southwest Lenzern or in the mines in Germany. You see young people blocking access, for example, to the mines or to these companies. You're seeing them directly protesting, boycotting, so on and so forth. And parallel to that, making legal action, and parallel to that, doing crowdfunding and mechanisms to support other kinds of actions. So I believe that the panoply of tools at the moment for more direct and concrete action for youth is definitely there, and they know it's there, and they are using it. So, and this is one of the things that we wanted to pass in the brief. It is no longer about cutting emissions, or it's no longer about just going to the streets and protest. Now they have much more impactful and meaningful tools to actually bring their voice and bring their action. And I think that's definitely something is happening, and it's going to just get stronger and stronger, because again, you see the heat waves, you see what's happening now, the fires, and again, the narrative used to be, oh, we have to fight the fires with that. Now it's like, no, we have to radically change how we manage forests. We have to radically change the incentives for forestation, so on and so forth. So the conversation is much more intersectional, much more systemic and holistic. And I believe that youth-led organizations are leading that new conversation with a new narrative.
Thank you, Filipe, and thank you, Katarina, for your questions. Maybe just to link onto that related to the question of environment being a human right. Now we're also seeing quite a lot of focus on young environmental human rights defenders. And I think just the use of this term shows quite a lot that we are actually speaking about human rights when we're speaking about environment. And in Strasbourg last month, there was a big meeting of environmental human rights defenders, not only youth, that the Council of Europe and the UN organized jointly. And we also had a meeting on young human rights defenders broadly, where this topic of environment was also represented. So yes, definitely we are seeing a move on this, and not only in connection to human rights, but also in connection to democracy. And it links with one of the recommendations from the brief and the position paper on democracy in civic space. So we cannot be really looking into the question of environment and climate without thinking of it in terms of democracy and human rights. Okay, we just have perhaps time for any closing remarks from Filipe before we close the webinar. I would not open for more questions because we're 4 minutes before the end.
No, I think like if anybody has any questions or issues or doubts, or if wants to take it deeper into the brief, please do send your feedback, and you can write to me or to Lana on this topic. I do believe this is a very dynamic, let's say, field at the moment. There's a lot of things happening, and I believe that the role of Council of Europe, the role of Youth Partnership, etc., in a way, is really to just support what's already happening, protect and safeguard those youth environmentalists, and just work on this capacity building and work on this secure funding for the youth, just to do what they want and what they need to do to secure their futures. And again, as we see that the collapse of a lot of the paradigms from COP15, COP30, the failure of these international agreements, we need more than ever for young people at the local, national, international level to step up and to make direct action. So I believe that the movement is about direct transformative action, and this is what needs to be supported as much as possible. This is, let's say, what I would put all my money and effort and time would be that, just to support direct empowerment and direct action from youth.
Thank you, Filipe. Maybe to say, it is already mentioned in the brief, but how this support can be done, we know that funding was brought up as the main issue, and there are sources of funding through Erasmus Plus and also through the European Youth Foundation. Thank you all. I know the summer break has started for many of us, so I really appreciate that you have taken the time to join the webinar. As Filipe said, please do reach out. If you have any questions or comments, we will also share the recording later on, so you can share it with your colleagues. And we will reconvene with our Youth Knowledge Break series again in the autumn with new topics and new experts who will be sharing their research and their knowledge. Thank you again. Have a great summer break, and see you all in autumn.
Thank you very much. Have a great day.
Obrigada. Ciao.